Good morning, or depending when you're listening to this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so I've made a podcast all about the Pokémon trading card game, and you're listening to PTCG Radio. Now, if you're one of the people that like to listen to PTCG Radio on a Wednesday right as it comes out, you will notice this is a couple hours later than usual. It will just about make it on Wednesday, but we are talking by a few minutes UK time. My apologies, long story short, I'm moving house this week, so I am a busy boy, but it is Wednesday, and as has been pointed out to me, Wednesday means PTCG Radio, so it would be rude of me to not get this up there. I've missed it a couple of times and had to do it on the Thursday, but let's get it out on the Wednesday this week. What we're going to be talking about this week is the first UK regional of the year, which happened this past weekend in Newport down in South Wales, and we are going to be talking about Tool Drop and how it might actually now be a contender, or might it? More on that as we go through. Now, in terms of news this week, there is very little news, but there are a couple of things that are worth talking about. First, there has been a Regirock promo announced, and it's got an ancient trait. And it is the same ancient trait as Groudon has. What this basically means is that the ancient traits are being repeated, and we pretty much knew this was going to happen anyway. Sceptile had the same ancient trait as Groudon, and now this Regirock, it's a promo in Korokoro, a Japanese magazine. It may well be a promo over here, or it may make it into our set proper. It doesn't really matter, we'll get it one way or another. But as Sceptile and Groudon and Regirock all have the same ancient trait, this is the Omega Barrier that prevents all effects of trainer cards, excluding tools and stadiums, done to the Pokemon with the ancient trait. So for argument's sake, if my opponent played a Pokemon Catcher to pull my Regirock into the active, it wouldn't do so. If my opponent did play the Hypnotoxic Laser, it would have no effect, but my opponent could put one of those Team Flare tools on it, or it could play a Team Flare Grunt to remove energy, although it couldn't play a Crushing Hammer or an Enhanced Hammer. Now, what is going to be interesting is whether these ancient traits carry on through the set, or whether we have a few in each set. So we've seen 3 so far. We've got Alpha Growth, which is the you can attach 2 energy cards per turn to a particular Pokemon, and that's interesting because it's any energy, not just a specific water energy, although we've currently seen that one on Swampert and Kyogre, or Mega Kyogre I should say, Mega Kyogre EX if you want to be really pedantic, both of which are water Pokemon. But what's interesting is that although Groudon and Regirock, Mega Groudon EX and Regirock are fighting Pokemon that have this Omega Barrier, Sceptile is actually a grass Pokemon that has Omega Barrier. And we've seen Torchic's Omega Multi-Strike, which allows it to attack twice, which we talked about last week was interesting, but I'm willing to bet there are going to be some much better Pokemon that you can use to attack twice. People who have been playing the game for a long time might remember Raichu Level X, which allowed you to attack twice, and there was, I know one guy, I forget his name, I do apologise, but there was one chap at UK Nationals a few years back who came very close to making cut, I believe it was in 2011, with a Raichu Level X Raichu Prime deck. In that brief period we had where both Primes and Level X's, Gengar was another one, where for certain Pokemon you could actually have a Prime and then evolve it into a Level X. Or level it up, or whatever you want to call it. But anyway, that's a little bit of history that some of you will remember and some of you won't. So what we can take from this whole ancient traits thing, and maybe I'm looking at this a bit too deeply for the minute, is that they are going to repeat as between different Pokemon. They are not specifically limited to one type, i.e. one ancient trait for fighting, one ancient trait for water, etc. And that it's going to be interesting to see whether the same ancient traits are being repeated throughout sets, or whether we're going to get a bunch of ancient traits in one set, and then a new set of ancient traits in another. I would like it if our kind of first Ruby and Sapphire set had a particular set of traits, and then we had a whole new set of traits in the second set. But all of this is going to be decided as we go through. The only other piece of news this week is hopefully you'll remember anyway, hopefully you're a regular listener, or at least listen to last week's. You should be aware that last week I did a huge bit on the podcast, a good kind of 20-30 minutes, talking about the Worlds announcement and all the implications thereof, although that did come with the fairly hefty caveat that all the information was subject to change because Pokemon had taken the announcement away. Now Pokemon have since put the announcement back up. That happened, I believe, yesterday or the day before, and And although rumours were circling at Newport Regionals that the qualification had raised to 300 points, the qualification threshold, that has not happened. The information is pretty much exactly the same. There are no real material differences. There are a couple of thoughts I have had, or that people have brought up to me, which I think are worth pointing out. Firstly, people who are more well versed than I have told me that travel award is generally used to refer to both travel and accommodation, which means that the top 22 in Europe, top 16 in the US, or North America would be more accurate, are going to be getting travel and they are going to be getting accommodation. Now, I have also heard that they are cutting down on the number of paid invites. So, for instance, and I've yet to confirm this information, but what I've been told is whereas last year first and second at UK Nationals got paid invites, this year it is just the winner that gets a paid invite. Similarly, I mentioned on last week's podcast that top 4, or second, third and fourth at this year's World will not get a paid invite. They'll just get the requisite number of championship points to achieve an invite the following year. And it's only the winner of Worlds this year that will receive a paid invite. And I said how that was down on previous years, but given that they're giving like over 50 extra paid invites, that was, really not that big a deal. But as my good friend Tommy Roberts pointed out to me this past weekend, there's going to be a huge overlap between people who get top 4 at Worlds and or top Nationals and people who are in the top 22 in Europe or 16 in the US. It's going to be very, very hard not to make the top 22 in the Europe if you win your country's nationals. Now, if you think about every country in Europe that has nationals, your Germany, your France, your Italy, I'm not going to try and name them all, Belgium, the Netherlands, UK, we could keep going for some time. If you think about all of them, and there's maybe 4 people per regionals that are going to be getting 500 championship points, at least that's what it was last year, going to be getting 500 championship points. If you've got all of those people that have got 500 championship points from nationals, it's going to be very, very difficult to be in the top 22 in Europe and not be one of those people. Let's say you get 200 or let's say you get 300 championship points, you stop playing, and then you get a top 4 at nationals, you're going to have 800 championship points. It's going to be very, very difficult for somebody else to get 800 championship points and not get any points at nationals. So there is going to be a huge overlap. Similarly, if you get second, third or fourth at World this year, you shan't be getting yourself a paid invite, but you will be getting yourself a 500 point head start, and we can assume, based on the fact that they've cut down the number of paid invites from getting top placing at Worlds, we can assume that they are going to be doing the same system next year. And if you start the year with 500 championship points more than everybody else, your chances of being in the top 22 in Europe, 16 in North America are vastly increased the following year. Just a couple of things to point out. Now, let's have a quick chat about Tool Drop. Tool Drop is a deck which did see quite a lot of play up until the release of Startling Megaphone, and it was one of these decks that some people, Mike Diaz for instance over in the US, was playing this quite a bit and seeing a moderate amount of success with this particular deck. But he, like everybody else, abandoned it. Now we're talking about the Trubbish that came around a little while ago. It first came around in Plasma Storm and never actually got reprinted. So it's been around since Plasma Storm. And it has one attack, Tool Drop, for a Psychic and a Colourless, 20 damage times the amount of tools on the field, both attached to your Pokemon and your opponent's Pokemon. And that was always kind of cool, it was always quite interesting, but it was hard to get enough tools onto the field to really make it worthwhile. What a lot of people did was they played that in a list where they were playing Garbodor, so it was a potential extra Pokemon to use with Garbodor. It was an extra attacker. But then we had a new Sigilyph that came out in Plasma Blast, I believe 2 sets later. And this Sigilyph had an ability called Toolbox that allowed you to have up to 4 Pokemon tools attached to it. Now this meant that theoretically, if you were to get 3 Sigilyphs on your bench and 3 Trubbish out, that would give you a maximum of 15 tools attached to your Pokemon. plus whatever was attached to your opponent's Pokemon. Bearing in mind 9 tools attached to your Pokemon is enough to knock out any EX that isn't psychic resistant, and let's say 10 Pokemon tools is even enough to knock out something like Darkrai, which has 180 HP and a resistance to psychic. You can see that this deck can get quite powerful quite quickly. You get a Trubbish with just 2 energy, basic Pokemon, 2 energy. You load up your Sigilyph with tools, and off you go. Now there's also a Masquerain that was released, I believe in Plasma Blast as well, that has an ability that allows you to switch your tools around. So the theory is you use Muscle Band, or more likely Silver Bangle, to attack with your Trubbishes, and you have you have that tool card which allows you to experience share, that's what I'm talking about, which basically means that when your Trubbish gets knocked out, and it only works if it's knocked out from damage, not from poison, but of course that's not really an issue because Trubbish only has 70 HP. It then put that energy to one of your benched Pokemon that had EXP share attached, and you streamed Trubbishes in that way. Now EXP share, I believe, has left the format at this particular stage, and Startling Megaphone came in. Now we always had Tool Scrapper, and Tool Scrapper was a problem, but Tool Scrapper only discarded 2 tools, so you could reuse the tools. It wasn't the end of the world. But Startling Megaphone got rid of every tool attached to your opponent's Pokemon, and essentially this killed Trubbish. It killed Tool Drop, because it got rid of all of the tools, and there were 2 ways to beat Tool Drop: get rid of the tools or get rid of the energy. You needed 2 energy attached to Trubbish in order to use the attack, so if you got rid of all the energy, let's say you used Startling Megaphone to get rid of the EXP share and then knocked out a Trubbish, they had no energy on the field, they wouldn't be able to attack. Or you just get rid of their tools and they're attacking for very little damage. So Startling Megaphone kind of killed it, EXP share getting rotated out killed it even more, and Tool Drop was nothing more than an afterthought. So that might raise the question of why is Tool Drop still relevant now? And the reason is we have essentially 3 new cards, 4 if you want to be a pedant, which I like being a pedant. We have 3 new cards which make Trubbish relevant nowadays. Number 1, we have Dimension Valley, and this is absolutely huge. Dimension Valley is the Psychic Stadium I've mentioned in YouTube videos, and especially in my top 10 cards of Phantom Forces. Go check out PTCG Radio on YouTube for more on that, and to see that video. And I've mentioned it in the podcast, and it is a stadium which lowers the attack cost of all Psychic Pokemon by 1 colourless energy. Now for those of you paying attention, that means that Trubbish now attacks for a single Psychic energy. That, ladies and gentlemen, is absolutely superb. Trubbish now attacks for 1 energy, and it can KO EXs for 1 energy. But what about the other problems we always had? Well, Startling Megaphone is still in the format. It's there. Startling Megaphone is a thing, and Startling Megaphone is very bad for Trubbish. It will still get rid of all of your tools. But Lysandra's Trump Card, or Lysandra's Last Resort, I forget which one is. I think Trump Card is the UK, the English wording. One of the things, one's Japanese. Let's say Lysandra's Trump Card. And that's legal now, and what that allows you to do is it allows you to put all of the cards from your deck and your opponent's deck, a discard pile. Lysandra's Trump Card is in the UK and US. In the English language. This allows you to basically put your discard piles back into your deck. So now if your opponent plays a Startling Megaphone, you can use Lysandra's Trump Card, and that's going to allow you to put all of your tools back into your deck. And if you've got a consistent deck, you'll be able to draw through your deck and attach all of those tools again. That is very, very good. The third card that's come out, just in case Tool Drop needed anything more from this current set, is the Team Flare tools. What you can actually do here is play your own Startling Megaphones, because you can attach these Team Flare tools to your opponent's Pokemon that already have tools attached. You get rid of their own tools, and you put down the Team Flare tools. Now the other thing you've got to remember, of course, is that if you're playing Tool Drop, your opponent is not going to want to put tools on the field, so you can put your own Team Flare tools onto them. And those 3 things have made Tool Drop relevant again. If you can get 3 or 4 tools onto your opponent's Pokemon, Team Flare tools, and you can be running up to 8 of these through Jamming Net and Headringer, then you can actually be attacking for, up to, potentially, 120 damage. Now that would involve your opponent having a full bench and you having a Team Flare tool on all of your opponent's Pokemon, and that's not going to be likely. But in a worst case scenario, your opponent plays a startling Megaphone and gets rid of all of your tools, you're still potentially going to have 40, 60, 80 damage being done by Trubbish from your opponent's tools. Now you play a Silver Bangle, and that's up to, realistically maybe 110 damage. Let's say you get 3 Team Flare tools and a Silver Bangle down. Silver Bangle on your Trubbish, 3 Team Flare tools on your opponent's Pokemon. You're doing 90 damage for a single energy after your opponent has played a startling Megaphone. Because you've got Dimension Valley, which allows you to attack for just 1 Psychic Energy. You've got the Team Flare tools on your opponent's Pokemon, which are not discarded when your opponent plays a startling Megaphone. And then you've got Lysandra's trump card, which allows you to go ahead and put all of your tools back in to draw back into them. And hopefully now you're seeing why Trubbish, why this tool drop deck can actually start to see a little bit of traction in the new format. Now, there are still a lot of problems that I'm going to be going through very, very shortly. But my point is that it is viable in a way it wasn't before. In the old format, your opponent plays startling Megaphone, gets rid of all of your energy, you haven't got 2 energy to attack, you've lost all of your tools. It's bad news bears, to be perfectly honest with you. Now, it's still got a lot of problems. Like I said, some of the problems are alleviated, but some are not. You have an over-reliance on Dimension Valley. Like I've said, this is a very important card, but you can play 4 and you can play a dowsing machine and you're probably going to win the Stadium War, so that's not a huge problem. The big problems include things like Trainer Lock, we have Trevenant, we have Seismitoad. Tools count as items, Trevenant and Seismitoad block items, this is bad. Garbodor turns off abilities. This is going to turn off. Now, a lot of people in their current list aren't playing Masquerain because you want to be making space for Team Flare tools, etc. and Dimension Valley, so Masquerains had to be cut for space reasons. But it still cuts off Sigilif's ability. Instead of being able to attach 4 tools per Sigilif, you can only attach 1. And if there are 4 on the Sigilif, 3 of them get immediately discarded at the point where Garbodor comes into play. Wobbuffet, incidentally, will not turn off Sigilif's ability, because Wobbuffet only turns off abilities of non-psychic Pokemon, and Sigilif is a psychic Pokemon. So your ability still stays. If your opponent uses a Gengar or a Donphan and transitions into a Wobbuffet, you're off the hook, quite frankly. But item lock is a problem. Ability lock is a problem. Startling Megaphone is still in the format. But if you play against a deck which can't draw into their startling Megaphones, and doesn't play Garbodor, and doesn't play, doesn't play Trainer Lock, you can have some easy wins. I played against, I was unaware of this Trubbish deck, I must admit. I'd noticed Dimension Valley and I knew about Trubbish, but I hadn't really put it all together and realised that Trubbish can be a good deck. And I played on PTCGO with my Speed Lugia list. And I played against a Trubbish and I got absolutely hammered. This Trubbish was one-hitting my Lugias within about 3 turns. And I used Lugia to take 2 prizes off for Trubbish, but it's very difficult to stream Lugias when you need 4 energy, including a Plasma energy. And it's very easy to stream Trubbishes when you need a basic Pokemon and a single energy, because your tools, which are adding up all the damage, stay on your benched Pokemon. I was very, very impressed, shall we say, by the list that I played, and I wish I'd written down the name of the person playing this deck, because it was a very good list, and it was one of those weird games where even though you lose, it's actually a very entertaining game, because you've learned something. You've been utterly smashed by, quite frankly, a superior deck. But you've learned about a new deck in the process, and that's pretty fun. Speaking of new decks, as a complete side note, I played against a very interesting deck the other day that basically played Suicune, Sigilif and Latias, played no energy whatsoever, and played lasers, hammers, trick shovels, Xerasic, essentially to stop you playing the game and trying to make you deck out. which actually worked because I didn't know what they were doing. If I played them in a best of 3, I would have scooped very early, played very few cards, and saved my ends to avoid decking out, and it would have been quite an easy victory. So it's far from a good deck. It's got the surprise factor. It was interesting, but I don't see it as viable. Plus, as my friend pointed out when I posted this, I think on Twitter, somebody pointed out to me, if they play Lissandra's trump card, that's never going to work. And they're absolutely correct. But that was a little aside, just an interesting deck I'd seen on PTCGO that I thought was worth sharing with you lovely people. Now, when it comes to tool drop, I've laid out the good points, I've laid out the bad points. Essentially, if your opponent doesn't play Trainer Lock and doesn't play Ability Lock, and you can get your tools out and they can't play Startling Megaphone, or you get your Team Flares, and there's a lot of ifs, buts and maybes here, I admit. But let's say that these things go in your favour and the deck is working as it should. Against non-EX decks, you may have a little bit of trouble. Something like Donphan would potentially not be great about this, because Donphan could chuck up Robo Substitute instead, and you would be killing Robo Substitute, and Donphan would quite possibly be one-hitting your Trubbishes, and the prize exchange wouldn't work. But against EX heavy decks, this can be really, really good. It's got good matchups. Something like Plasma, or especially Lugia builds, you are probably going to have a very good matchup here. Something like Vrizian Genesect or Manectric, which is going to take a couple of turns to get going, you are going to actually have a pretty darn good matchup. Something like Eviltal, potentially you could have a good matchup as well, even with the Psychic Resistance on Darkrai and things like that. But there are problems. If you come across something like a Seismitoad list, essentially, as soon as Seismitoad plays a Startling Megaphone, or even if they don't and you just haven't got many tools down, you've lost. I've lost. And that is going to be the end of the game. Similarly, things that play a heavy Garbodor line could well be a big problem for you. Donphan and decks like that, which are going to hit and run into, say, a Robo Substitute, are going to be a problem, because you're going to carry the Robo Substitute while your Donphans keep taking prizes against you. So good matchups and bad matchups, something to bear in mind. It's a deck that you are going to run into at tournaments, because there are going to be people that play it. And it's exactly the kind of deck where if you run into it at a tournament, you could end up losing very, very quickly, because it's an awkward kind of deck. So something to bear in mind, shall we say, ladies and gentlemen. Something to bear in mind. So this past weekend, I went down to Newport in South Wales for the Aberdare Regionals. For those of you that aren't in the UK and don't know, Wales is a little country attached to the west coast of England, and if you go quite south, you find Newport. Simple as that. I had to leave my house at 5:30 in the morning to travel down there, and even though I left the venue at 9:30, I didn't get home till 1:30 in the morning. So a very, very long day indeed. And as I said, I've been packing, getting ready to move. I literally stole Alex Hill's deck list. His Donphan deck list that I did a deck breakdown with on my YouTube channel. Because to be perfectly honest with you, as I said, I love that deck list. It's a really good, really consistent list. I did make one mistake, which I realised during round 2. I was very tired the evening before. I'd been working till about 9:15. I had to be up at 5:30 the next day, and I'd been tired from packing all week. I used the wrong Lunatone. Instead of using the Lunatone with a cool ability, I used the double draw Lunatone. It's really silly. It made my deck worse. I don't think it had an appreciable impact on my performance on the day, but just a note that sometimes when you are tired, you really need to double check your deck list. Because I checked my deck list, I wrote it out, and I just didn't even realise. Get a friend who's less tired than you to check it. So, I'm playing Donphan. Round 1, I am drawn against Andrea Ciolin, quite possibly the best player in Italy, playing TDK. A very good player, a bad matchup. TDK, heavy Kyurem, not good for Donphan. Not what you want to see round 1 of a tournament, but hey ho, what can you do? Game 1, he rolls me as Kyurem should. Game 2, he has a bit of a slower start, I have a better start. I'm able to hit and run into Kyurems and soak up some outrage damage, do some damage with outrage on the Kyurems, at one point getting a 2-hit KO on a Kyurem, with my own Outrage Kyurem, and he's not able to draw into his Lysandra. Now, he's playing not lasers, but he's playing quite a heavy Lysandra line. I get lucky because he doesn't draw into Lysandras, and I don't really... It's not a particularly convincing victory, but at the end of the day, it works out. It works out quite nicely. So, we get there, and it works. And it's all good. It's far from amazing, but what can you do? In Game 3, and I realised this the other day, I didn't realise at the time, my opponent didn't realise at the time, and I told this story of how I won Game 3 to at least a dozen people, none of whom pointed this out to me, and it occurred to me randomly in the shower the other morning of all things. So when I tell you the story of how I won Game 3, you should see a problem with it. And yes, it was an oversight on my part, and yes, it means that maybe I didn't necessarily deserve the win. There's nothing I can particularly do about this, so please keep an open mind, we all make mistakes. Game 3, I've won Game 2, and I did, for the record, I played well in Game 2. I set up 2 Donphans in order to use Wreck, which is what you have to do against difficult matchups, so that I can basically one-hit KO Kyurems. He's able to Lysandra 1 Donphan and kill it, but I've got a second one set up to just attach 1 energy and Wreck and knock out the Kyurem, and then I'm able to use Lysandras to finish off his Thunderouses and get the wins here. So I did play quite well, but he also drew fairly badly, couldn't draw his Lysandras. So although it was a deserved victory for me, I had to play well to win, there was a bit of luck. So Game 3, he starts Lone Thunderous. I start Horlicher. He's not able to bench another Pokemon and passes. I have a Silver Bangle, I attach it to Horlicher, but I don't have an energy. So I play an Ultra Ball for Phanpy, Juniper, draw the energy, attach it to Horlicher, and my opponent scoops. My opponent knows that if I draw an energy I win, I know that too. As soon as I'd show him the energy, he extends his hand. So there was no cheating per se, my opponent did scoop the game. But both of us were under a false assumption. Have you realised what it is yet? Horlicher has an ability. Damage from this Pokemon's attacks isn't affected by weakness or resistance. Which means although Thunderous is fighting weak, Horlicher does not do 180 damage with its attack for 60 with 30 for the Silver Bangle. It does 90. I had made the mistake. I thought it used weakness, but I waited for my opponent to scoop. I didn't announce victory, I waited for him to scoop. And he did. I was under a false assumption, so was he. There was no wrong, I didn't coerce him or anything like that, but I like to be honest on the podcast, I didn't really deservedly win Game 3. Having said that, I got nicely set up on Game 1, he had absolutely nothing. I was going to get the KO with a Donphan, because I could retreat the Horlicher into the Donphan. I was going to get a KO with the Donphan on turn 2, and I was going to build up a sizable lead. I probably would have won Game 3 anyway, but just something that, shall we say, went a little bit wrong. And of course, if you want to judge me, also judge the people at the tournament who I told that story to who didn't correct me. Round 2, I'm against a lovely chap called Sham. Now what I do, I know a lot of people, well, not a lot of people, but I've heard feedback from a few people that tournament report's not the most interesting part of the podcast. I've also heard from other people they're their favourites. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to try and focus on specifically the cards they played and how the matchup works, rather than the specific matchup I'll just try and kind of do very quickly. So I'm talking more about matchups and stuff you can learn than my actual game itself. Charm is playing Virizion Genesect, and the Virizion Genesect Donphan matchup comes down very simply to, is he going to hit his plasma energies at the right time? Now, Charm had a very good deck list. He played Deoxys. The reason you play Deoxys is because Donphan has 130 HP. So you have a Genesect with a Muscle Band and a Deoxys on the bench. Megalocannon does 130. The game then literally turns into, can the Virizion Genesect player use plasma energies to red signal the Donphans and kill them? Or is the Donphan player going to just be able to use Spinning Turn to 2-hit KO Virizions and Genesects using Fighting Stadium and Strong Energy to increase the amount of damage done so that you can take quick prizes and win that way? In Game 1, it really comes down to the wire. I am not able to stream Donphans. Every turn I have a Donphan and I have a Phanpy. I don't have Donphans ready to go. It's a nail-biting game. There is a pivotal turn where I enter 4. I've got a Phanpy active, I attach the energy. If I hit a Donphan off the end, I knock all his energy off the board, and I'm gonna win the game. If I don't hit the Donphan, he knocks out my Phanpy, I have no Donphans, he wins the game. As it happens, I do hit the Donphan off an end to 4, I get a little bit lucky and win game 1. Game 2, unfortunately, isn't quite as close. He's not able to hit his plasma energies at the right time. I am able to have reserve Donphans the whole game, and Donphan, if you've got reserve Donphans, if you can stream the Donphans, Virizion and Genesect is one of your most favourable matchups. You're two hitting them easily, and even if they're killing your Donphans, unless they can kill all of them, you're just going to keep two hitting until they run out of Pokemon. And every turn they can't red signal, you are going to put a Sigilif active, and they're not going to be able to attack without using G-Booster, which they really don't want to be doing. So I win that game, and I'm up 2-0. So round 3 I'm drawn against Ollie Barnett, and the good news is I'm 2-0, which is nice, and I'm on stream, which is also nice. I did tweet out the link to the stream, and I know a few of you watched that. Apparently it was jerky. Now, the stream is available. I have got a copy of it. I haven't been able to look back over it yet. So I may well be able to grab a copy of that and commentate over it and stick it up on my YouTube channel, but I don't know what the quality is going to be like, and I don't know how much you guys are going to want to watch stuff which is essentially very, very jerky. So I'll check it out, and I might put this video up. But essentially, the good news is he's playing Yveltal. That's good. I like playing Yveltal with Donphan. It's a pretty nice matchup. The bad news is he's playing Dusknoir. I really don't like playing against Dusknoir. It makes the whole matchup much, much more difficult. Essentially, when you're playing Donphan against Yveltal, then you use your Zekrom. Now, I was only playing one, but if you're playing more than one, it's better. And you hit with Donphan and go to Zekrom when they're using regular Yveltal. They can either attack into it and then you get an easy KO on them, or they don't attack into it and they don't. If they're trying to attack with the X's, you've got Sigilif. And at some point, unless they really hit their Lysandras when they need to, they're going to be able to use Wreck. You're going to be able to use Wreck to knock out their Yveltals right away, and it's really not a very bad matchup. Straight Yveltal, Garbodor, etc. is a pretty nice matchup for you. The thing about Dusknoir is you've got to be very, very careful, because Outrages are very good in the deck. But the problem is they can not only hit the Outrager, but then after one more turn, they essentially, not only do they get the damage off your Outrager, but then there's damage on the field. So if I put a Phanpy down, essentially I cannot put a Phanpy down while there's 80 damage on the field. It also means that my opponent can take KOs with little Yveltal, because a little Yveltal of a Muscle Band does 50 damage. You add a Verbank Laser, it does 80 damage, which means he can KO a Donphan with little Yveltal if there's 50 damage on the, if there's 80 damage on the field, or even 50 if he's using the Verbank Laser. He can KO the Donphan with little Yveltal, and that, ladies and gentlemen, it makes it a very, very difficult matchup indeed. It's not unwinnable, but it's very, very difficult indeed. And to be honest, a lot of the matchup comes down to Lysandras. In game 1, Ollie Barnett hits his Lysandras at the right time. He's able to basically stop my Donphan getting up and running. I should also mention that he had I know he's listening to the podcast. He was one of the people that got in touch with me to remind me I hadn't posted it yet. So, hello Ollie. I actually very much enjoyed our game. It was a very interesting game that both of us really had to think about. It wasn't kind of easy on either of our parts, to be honest with you. And in game 1 he hits Lysandras when he needs to hit the Lysandras, and he takes out my Donphans, and he uses a Dusknoir effectively, and there's nothing I can do. I never get a wreck off in game 1, and that's a problem. Now, I do make a really silly mistake in game 1, where at one point I Lysandra hits Darkrai and hit it for 180, after attaching a strong energy to a second Phanpy, which was just silly. I could have had the KO. Now, whether that would have made a difference in the game, I don't know. I think I probably would have lost game 1 anyway. Game 2, I get to go first, which is a bonus, although I think I went first game 1, actually. And it's not it goes very similarly to game 1. He gets his Dusknoir up, he's got a good deck, it runs like it should. It's far from easy, but I'm able to protect my Donphans a little more. His Lysandras don't quite come out at the right time, and I'm essentially able to set up a situation like I did in game 2 against Andrea, where I'm able to have 2 Donphan that are 1 energy away from wrecking. Essentially, what you want to do when you're playing Donphan is to get 2 fighting, so you just need a double colourless, or a fighting double colourless, so you just need a second fighting, onto your Donphan so that you can wreck by attaching 1 more energy, rather than just putting 4 energy on a Donphan where your opponent can Lysandra and kill it, and then you don't have a Donphan ready to wreck. Because I was able to do that with 2 Donphan, I was then able to start work with other Pokemon, and I know I'm going to have a Donphan to wreck with. It means as long as I hit my Lysandras at some point, I've got the win. I win game 2, there's about 2 minutes left in the best of 3, so we call it a draw and get on out of there. Round 4, I'm playing against Andy Morehouse, the father of Ryan Morehouse, who's been making waves in the UK scene and actually made top 16 at Worlds last year in his first year of Masters. And he's playing Virizion Genesect. And I discussed this for round 2. It's not a bad matchup. But it is one hell of a worse matchup when they're playing Crushing Hammers like he is. Game 1, and again, he's playing Deoxys as well, so it literally comes down to hammers, and it comes down to the Plasma Energy. Game 1, he hits a hammer or 2, but he doesn't hit crucial hammers to leave me without energy, and I'm able to win in the same way I won against Charm. Game 2, I'm not. He hits good crushing hammers. He hits his plasma energy. He takes KOs. I don't draw as well. I'm not getting anything set up. And I just don't have Donphans in this game. And I literally get to the point where my energy/Donphan count is so low that I literally don't have enough resources to finish the game. Nor do I have enough time to play a game 3. So I know if I lose game 2, it's going to be a draw, and that's going to leave me at 2-0-2, and it's making cut much less of a possibility. So I played a long game. Now, to be fair, I'm fairly certain I didn't stall here, and I asked Andy at the end of the game, and he told me he didn't feel like I'd stalled or taken a long time. But I did what I could. I played Ultra Balls that I didn't necessarily need to play, just to waste a few seconds in my turn. But mostly what I did was I used Pokemon Catcher and Lysandra to drag up Pokemon of his, to try and make him take a turn or 2 trying to draw into a switch to get them out of the active. It also helped in game 1 that he started Deoxys and couldn't find a switch, so I actually was able to take 2 easy prizes off of Deoxys before he got an Emerald Slash. That helps in the matchup. And I used Sigilyph active, force him to draw a Plasma Energy or a G-Booster to get rid of my Sigilyph. And even when time is cool, Andy still needs kind of an extra 2 or 3 turns after the +3 in order to win. So it's not like he was 1 turn away from winning, but let me make it very clear, there was no way I was going to win game 2. But I didn't need to win game 2, I'd won game 1. I didn't cheat, I didn't slow play, at least I don't think I did, and Andy confirmed that I didn't. But I was able to basically force Andy to take too many turns. Had I not played it like I had, then maybe Andy wouldn't have taken quite so many turns and he would have been able to win the game. As it was, it's very, very simple. I managed to make him take enough turns to get the win. So I'm sitting at 3-0-1, I'm looking pretty good, and I'm drawn against Scott Burgess, the UK national champion. And he's playing Yveltal, but he's playing a kind of a weird list. He's got Seismitoad, he's got Mewtwo, he's got Tricks, and he's an exceptional player. Game 1's a very odd game in that Scott has nothing. But he does have a Mewtwo DCE, Muscle Band, and 2 Lysandra. And nothing else, but that's what he has. Turn 1, I bench a Phanpy, Muscle Band, Strong Energy. He hits the Mewtwo DCE Muscle Band, which is the only way he's going to do the 80 damage. Lysandra's a Phanpy and kills it. So turn 2, I've got another Phanpy, another Strong Energy, another Muscle Band, he Lysandras and kills it. So I'm down both my Muscle Band, 2 of my 4 Strong Energy, and 2 of my 4 Phanpy, and I've got a Phanpy prized. So even though Scott's, down to 4 prizes, and he's vulnerable to N, and he's drawing badly and all of that, he tops Exajuniper and he's off. And game 1 could have gone either way. But those early turns deprived me of Donphan really did the trick for Scott. I played too long. I did not scoop as early as I should have done, and I lost. Game 2, I believe, had we had enough time, I maybe could have got a win in game 2, but Scott, he's played the game brilliantly. He played it as well as he could. He used Seismitoad when he needed to. He used Mewtwo when he needed to. He used Baby Yveltal when he needed to. And it was a very frustrating game on my part, not because Scott was slow playing or anything like that, but because Scott played essentially like I did in my game 2 against Andy, and I didn't have enough turns to win. Now, there was a weird issue of a ruling where I don't think I was given a long enough extension, but truth be told, I can't complain. about this game. I lost to a good player with a good deck who deserves the win. It wasn't really bad luck on my part. I just lost, and I don't mind those games. So I'm sitting at 3-1-1, and I know that one more win gets me top 16, and that's all I'm really aiming for, because I'm a bit too tired to stay for top 8. So I need one more win out of 3 games, and I've lost the first one, but I've still got 2 more chances. And then I'm playing against a lovely chap called Samare, and he's playing Garbodor Seismitoad. And I like this. I have a very good Seismitoad list. Between the DCEs for Wreck and the Hawluchers and the Catchers, I've got a very good Seismitoad game. But my opponent plays Super Scoop Up. Now, as an example, in Game 1, he hits 3 Super Scoop Up and still only takes 3 prizes. I have a favourable matchup. Game 2, I start double Hawlucher and draw nothing while he kills them both. I don't draw a supporter, except a Colress that I can use for 2 cards, while he runs through both Hawlucher, no other Pokemon, and I lose. Bit frustrating, but I've got Game 3 and I know I've got a favourable matchup. And I like to refer to the Game 3 as a Ross game. He hits Super Scoop Up when he needs to, he hits heads on laser while I hit tails. I whiff supporters, I whiff energy, everything that can go wrong does go wrong, and I lose the game. My opponent played extremely well. He had a good deck, he played it very, very well, but I know I've got a favourable matchup in this, and I know that if I don't have quite such luck, I win. Hey-ho, these things happen. I'm sitting at 3-2-1, and now I've gone from a win 1 game for top 16, 2 for top 8, to the I've now got 1 game, I win and I'm in, I lose and I'm not. And I play against a lovely chap. Now, he was a new competitive player. One of these players who was just started out, and he was a lovely chap. But he was very keen to win, and he knew what was on course. And actually, as it happened, his resistance wasn't good enough for top 16. He was never going to get points, whether he won this game or not. And he told me at the beginning of the game his resistance wasn't good. And I informed him that the chances of him making top 16 win or lose were very slim. He took a full 5 minutes for his first turn of the game, which I don't mind, because on the first turn you got to do your searches, etc. It was an excessively long turn, and I would have called a judge had this kept on, but he was a newish player, so I didn't make a big deal about it. But as I mentioned from my previous games, my Eviltown matchup is very, very good. Between Hawlucher and Donphan and Sigilif and Zekrom and Catcher and 4 DCE for Wreck, all of these things make my game good. In Game 1, he uses Baby Eviltal, I use Zekrom, he brings out Big Eviltal, I'm able to Wreck. It's not a particularly long game and I win quite comfortably. Game 2, he does exactly the right thing. He goes on turn 1, Seismitoad, DCE, Muscle Band and passes. Unfortunately, I've got a fairly decent opening hand. I'm able to go Kyurem, DCE, Silver Bangle, retreat the Hawlucher with which I'd started, and I'm able to hit his Seismitoad for 50. He knows that if he attacks into my Kyurem, his Seismitoad's going to die before my Kyurem dies, and I'm going to be up by 2 prizes, and he knows it, and it goes like Game 1. When he goes for Baby Eviltal, I go for Zekrom, and when he gets Eviltal EX out, I'm able to go Donphan and switch into Sigilif. Unfortunately, both games were not particularly long. He seemed to be a very good player, a chap I'd not met before, but he seemed a very competent player. The unfortunate thing was that my deck is built to beat fairly standard Eviltal lists, and that's what he had. Now, there were a couple of things that I was unhappy with my opponent in this game, which is one of the reasons I haven't named him. Firstly, he insisted at the beginning of the game how he felt confident because he has a very good Donphan matchup. And I told him that, I tested and I felt the opposite, but, we'll see who we're about to play. And he reiterated that, no, trust him, he's done the testing, he's got a favourable matchup. And that's not necessarily a very polite thing to do. To sit to your opponent before you've played and insist that you've got a favourable matchup, i.e. sitting there saying, I'm going to win this game, before you've even started playing, is something that could be perceived as rude. Now, I'm not saying his intention was to be rude, I don't believe that it was, but it's not a very polite way to go about it, so please don't be that person in tournaments. Because he actually ended up looking silly when I won both games, dropping, I think I dropped maybe 3 or 4 prizes over both games. So, they were fairly convincing wins. He had probably tested against not quite as good Donphan lists. And I can't take any credit for the list. I nicked it from Alex Hill, and even then I got it wrong by playing the wrong Lunatone. But it's not a polite way to start the game, sitting there saying, I think I'm going to win. The other thing was, after winning game 1, I did my usual thing. I pile shuffle 3 times between games. Especially with a deck like Donphan, where by the end of the game I've got 3 Donphans, each with energy and tool attached, and if I just shuffle it together, I've got in a row, I've got a tool, 2 energy, Donphan, Fampi, and I'm going to want to really shuffle them together. Now what I find with people is, if I lose game 1 and the clock then is on my opponent's side, I do my regular bit of shuffling, 3 pile shuffles, bit of shuffling, present my deck, taking 2 to 3 minutes, which I am entitled to do under the rules of the game, just so we're clear. I've checked with many judges about this. If I've lost game 1 and the clock is on my opponent's side, they sit there and go, don't worry, take all the time you need. When I win game 1 and the clock is on my side, I shuffle in the exact same way, and my opponent gets very annoyed with me. For the record, I do break this rule if it's 1-1, purely because I hate draws. I would rather shuffle badly, risk drawing dead and lose than go into a draw in most games. So I don't shuffle as much before game 3, just because of how much I hate draws. Most of the time I'd rather lose than draw, because at least we've actually got a resolution. The only reason I didn't do it with Ollie Barnett in this particular tournament was we literally had 2 minutes. We were never going to get a game 3. And my opponent did this. After game 1, I start pile shuffling, and I shuffle his deck and say I'm going to do another pile shuffle, and he tells me that he thinks 3 pile shuffles is excessive, and he says it in a way which is potentially rude. Now, to be fair to my opponent, he apologised, and he said, I'm sorry, that probably sounded rude, I didn't mean to, and he didn't. We had very pleasant games, but the telling me he thought he was going to win beforehand, complaining about my shuffling, he was a fairly new player, and I suppose if you are a new player, what I'm trying to say here is, please don't say things like that to your opponent, because although you're probably not intending to sound rude, it could well come across as rude to your opponent, and I don't hold anything against him. I'm going to see this chap again, and I'm sure we'll have very pleasant games. But it did come across as rude at the time. If you lose game 1 and your opponent wants to have a good shuffle between games, I'm afraid they're entitled to do that. Especially if you've taken 5 full minutes for one turn in the game, you certainly shouldn't be moaning about how long your opponent's taking. So I end up with 4 wins, 2 losses and 1 draw. My resistance is crazy high at about 64%, and I end up 15th place. I get 45 points, which leaves me with 55 points out of the 300 that I need for Worlds. It's a long way to go, and I'm going to have to place well at a couple more regionals yet, but it's a nice start. I am missing 2 regionals later on this year, but I am still going to Manchester this coming Saturday and St Austell in Cornwall the Saturday after, and I'll be making 3 or 4 regionals next year. So hopefully I can get top 16 at 3 of them or top 8 at 2 of them, and then place well at a couple cities and get my invite. But we shall wait and see. I've never got 300 championship points before. I don't see why now would be any different, to be honest with you. But a lot of people have asked me, that's where I am. Now, in terms of the tournament as a whole, it was weird. There was a lot of Super Scoop Up. I told you about Samer, my round 6 opponent, who played Super Scoop Up, and narrowly missed out on points in 17th place. And 2 people made top 8 with Darkrai Eviltal Super Scoop Up. So, here is the top 8 after the final. So when it was all done, here was the top 8 with their decks. In 8th place, we had Dylan Smith with Virizion Genesect. In 8th place, we had Alex Dow with Aromatisse, an excellent choice for the tournament. I really should have said this was pre-Phantom Forces. I mentioned it on last week's podcast, but I haven't said it yet today. This was a pre-Phantom Forces tournament, just so we're clear. So in 8th place, Dylan Smith with Virizion Genesect. 7th place, Alex Dow with Aromatisse, an excellent choice for the event. He didn't see a supporter before his opponent had taken 5 prizes in either game, which is bad luck. In 6th place, Jake Wolvin with Eviltal Super Scoop Up. In 5th place, Charles Barton with Virizion Genesect. Moving into the top 4, in 4th place we had Josh Podesta with Big Basics, by which I really mean it's basically kind of Landorus, Raichu, Garbodor, that kind of deck. And Luke Saban with Donphan. The runner-up was Scott Burgess with Eviltal Garbodor, and the winner was Emmanuel with Eviltal Super Scoop Up. And you can imagine that he'd win, because in an Eviltal mirror match, would you rather have Super Scoop Ups or would you rather have Garbodor? Super Scoop Ups. So congratulations to all of those people for placing well. If for those of you keeping count, there's 3 Evil Towels, including both of the finalists, 2 Virizion Genesect, 1 Donphan, 1 Aromatisse, 1 Big Basics. And just in terms of records, because I know people sometimes wonder about this, everybody who had 16 points made top 8. There were 4 people with 15 points, only one of which made top 8. That person had an opponent's win percentage, a tiebreaker if you will, of 68%. And all the people that missed had a tiebreaker of 59% opponent's win percentage or lower. There were 8 people who had 13 points, and 2 of them, including myself, made top 16. And the cut-off point there was if you had an opponent's win percentage of over 60%, you made top 16. If you had an opponent's win percentage of under 60%, you didn't make top 16. So you really did need a very high opponent's win percentage. And going down through my opponents, Andrea scooped. He dropped after not having a great tournament. But my round 2 opponent came 26th, my round 3 opponent came 9th, and then my opponents came 19th, 2nd, 17th, and my lowest finishing opponent was 44th. I had 1 opponent make top 16, 1 make top 8, 1 make top 16, 1, and 2 of them just miss. So 4 of my 7 opponents were in the top 20 players out of 91. So, you know, I know I was one of the 2 that made top 16 with 13 points, but just can we point out, did not have an easy tournament. And that's pretty much it for the tournament. That are the winners, how I did, etc. Hopefully I gave you a little bit of added value beyond just how I did. I explained some matchups, texts you could use, etc. And that will do it for today's podcast. I've told you the updated news about World, we've had a good chat about Tool Drop, and I've told you about the first regionals of the year. This coming Saturday I shall be in Manchester at Fanboy Free for the Manchester regionals, and I shall be playing a new deck because this does include Phantom Forces. So I've got some things in the works. I will tell you how I got on, give you a little report next week. Just as we leave, quick shout out to Mike Lamb, Becky Mander and Jake Wolvin, who lent me quite a few cards because in order to play Donphan this weekend I needed to borrow Big Breath, 4 Phanpy, 4 Donphan, 4 Strong Energy, 3 Corinna, 3 Fighting Stadium and 2 Sigilif. That's an awful lot of cards for one deck, so thank you to those people. They are all lovely people, and I am indebted to them for it. Few people came up to me and told me they listened to the podcast. Hello to those people. I very much appreciate that. You are all lovely people. I'll be back next week. We'll be talking about Manchester regionals, and hopefully next week I'll be able to really just give you my updated impressions of how Phantom Forces fits into the new format. But if there's anything else we need to talk about, I'm sure we can go into that. Thank you very much for listening as always. My name's Ross and you've been listening to PTCG Radio.